very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon, this evening, for a Women in Journalism panel event. It's called How to be a Media Leader, which probably sounds rather grand, but I think essentially what we thought would be a really useful event would be something where we talk about what it's like to manage people, whether that's a very small team of people or whether it's a huge team of people. And we've got an incredible panel tonight, and we're really delighted they've joined us, who can talk about their experiences with different sizes of staff working for them, and what they've learned from that, and then perhaps what you may feel are sort of answering some of the questions that you're facing on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to keep it very free-flowing. We're going to have hopefully lots of chat between the panelists, and also try to leave as much time as we possibly can for questions at the end, so that it's really kind of useful to everybody indeed. So I think maybe the best way really to begin is if we can, I'm going to go through the panelists and ask them to introduce themselves and to talk about what they're doing now and other roles they've had to get to where they are, but also within the context of leading people, how they've led people in those different roles that they've had. So let's start with Cristina Nicolotti Squires, who is the Director of Content at Sky News now, which sounds like a ginormous job and must be leading many, many people. Cristina, do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us this evening. Yes, I'm Director of Content at Sky News. In effect, that means there's two of us that run Sky News underneath my boss, John Riley, and I have about 350 people ultimately underneath me, I guess. And that covers the production staff for TV, online, radio, and long form documentaries, so and digital, web and app. So yeah, quite a big disparate team. I joined Sky nearly 5 years ago. Before that, I was the editor of Channel 5 News. I worked at ITN, and ITN has the contract to produce news for ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. I had a very small team there. I had 50 people in total. And before that, I was head of output at ITV News, where I reckon probably about 35 to 40 people came under me. And I've had so many jobs where I used to be head of home news, which was probably about another 100 people at ITV News. So I've had lots of different jobs that have meant managing teams. I guess my mantra of leadership is I'm a very collaborative leader. I believe my style is, or my secret is, hire really good people, give them a good sense of direction and let them get on with it. That's not because I'm lazy, but I think if you're in a leadership role, it's very important to kind of be like the captain on the bridge, have a very clear view of the distance and not get your head too much bogged down in detail. Obviously depends very much where you are. But yeah, I've kind of led all sorts of teams. And of course, in my very first jobs, I was a sort of a field producer on location in foreign locations, leading maybe just 3 or 4 of us. But I think
you've done everything from 3 or 4. Yeah, a long way from 3 or 4 to 350. That's a big, and I think that's really interesting, that point about your style of leadership, which I think is something we'll come back to throughout the session. So thank you very much, Cristina. That's fantastic. Helen Dalby, Audience and Content Director for Reach for the North East, which is overseeing a vast number of titles. So talk us through who you're leading at the moment and how you've got to that place.
Hello, thank you for including me tonight. I'm delighted to be here. So I am the Audience and Content Director for Reach in the North East, Yorkshire and Humber. So what that means is that I lead our newsrooms in Newcastle, Teesside, Yorkshire, Hull and Grimsby. So a number of titles fall within that remit, and I'm responsible for the delivery of audience and engagement across that region, which really spans from the Scottish border to Lincolnshire. And I'm also responsible for the development of our digital brands within that region. There are some new brands within that which launched in 2020. Yorkshire Live being the biggest of those that started life in March 2020. And I lead our newsroom teams and oversee the implementation of our editorial strategy to ensure that we're reaching the largest local audience in the most effective way that we can. And also shape our local content strategy and represent our brands externally. I've been with Reach for 15 years now, and I've always been in a management position within the company. I joined in 2007 launch what is now Chronicle Live as a standalone website. So that was very much the sort of first project that I became involved with. And my first big leadership opportunity came in 2013, 2014, when we launched Newsroom 3.1, which was the digital newsroom transformation that started its life in the Northeast and was piloted here. And that was a really exciting opportunity to lead really seismic change in the way that we did things and really turn the kind of newsroom workflows completely around and work in a completely different way. So it was very much about leading people through significant change, which I learned a lot from that process. And I also work as a strategic board director for the Newcastle Gateside Initiative and as chair of the board of trustees for the Sunshine Fund, which is a charity that the Chronicle supports and has been based in our newsroom here in Newcastle for many years.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Busola, who's currently associate editor and supplements editor for Livingetc and Homes and Gardens, so all the beautiful magazines. So tell us about the team that you lead, and the previous teams you've led, because you've been an editor in the past as well, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yes. So how we work now is quite different. So I don't lead a huge team as such. The numbers that are being thrown around at the moment is like, oh, really quite insane. At Livingetc and Homes and Gardens, I mean, I sort of, for a brief time, I led a team of just 5. Sort of, I had about 4 or 5 direct reports, and we just work in very, very small teams. So it's very different the way we work. Previous to that, I was editor of Star magazine, which is which was, it's no longer, but it was a celebrity weekly. And I had a team of 25, and then we had, contributors as well. And I did that for 7 or 8 years. So that was, sort of quite a fast-paced, fast-moving sort of situation to be in. And also overseeing, not just overseeing the content, but overseeing sort of lots of people who are quite young. It attracted the positions attracted quite young, sort of a young team. So it's really kind of been both a manager and a mentor in some respects. So that was quite interesting to do for for 7 years. And prior to that, they were just always then I was features editor on Saturday Express magazine. I had a team there of about 8. Sort of overseeing that. So it's sometimes it's quite different having a small team, because it can feel a bit more intense.
And I think sometimes it can be harder having a smaller team than
so that's basically sort of my pathway.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Tal Gossersman, who is managing editor of the I newspaper. So thank you very much for joining us. So Tal, how did you get into your kind of leadership role, and how do you find that now?
Thanks for having me. So I've been at I about a year and a bit now. And when I joined, we had a team of about 85 staff members. We've undergone a period of huge growth and hiring. So we're now up to about 130 staff. So it's been a huge kind of period of recruitment and transformation in the newsroom. So which has been obviously quite a big undertaking. Before that, I was at a travel startup called Culture Trip, and I had a team of about 30 there. And before that, I was deputy managing editor at Mail Online for a number of years, and at the Daily Mail before that. So managing large teams kind of alongside others, but yeah, lots of and change management. So yeah.
Thank you very much. So thank you to all our panelists this evening. And I should take this point that thank you also to Facebook, who are helping us put this event on this evening. So great thanks to them. So I wonder, for me, there's for a lot of people that are listening this evening, I think the question is, are you born a leader, or can you become a leader? And I think that is the question that I think perhaps lots of people, maybe when they're in the early days of their career, sort of really struggle with. Because I think, I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm just not that person who can stride up and down the office in high heels and sort of like shout out commands. So I don't know, Helen, are you a natural leader?
I think some people have a natural ability to communicate well and to take the lead in a group dynamic and to inspire others, and that for other people, I think those things come less easily. But I think that there's always progress that you can make to cultivate the right skills, and a lot of it is learned by experience. I think the very best leaders have empathy and emotional intelligence, and I think that those qualities are difficult to teach and can't be faked. But I think that there are lots of tactics and techniques that can make good leaders great, or can make less confident leaders more composed. So, for example, I think certain leadership skills, it's absolutely vital to be able to present publicly with confidence, and that doesn't come naturally to everybody. It didn't used to come naturally to me, but I think that absolutely improves with time and experience. Even if you think you're starting from a terrible place, I think there are techniques that you can learn, and that you learn by doing, and you gain confidence by doing. And I think that you can improve those skills, and that makes you better at the elements of the job that may seem difficult or even insurmountable at first.
Those techniques that you speak of, I mean, have you gone on any sort of formal training courses, or have you learnt them yourself?
A bit of both. I've been lucky enough to go on a couple of really great leadership courses within Reach during my time sort of moving into leadership positions. And I found those incredibly useful at really just gaining the confidence in myself and my ability to express what needed to be expressed in a way that was confident. But I think that there was no better way of gaining confidence in the public presentation element of a leadership role than actually doing it. And I think that I've got better at that over time. And I think that it's just been a case of gaining that confidence through doing those things, even when you're out of your comfort zone, and just being put in that position. And I think you get a little bit better at it every single time that you do it. And it's just a case of gaining that confidence through the opportunity to actually be put in the position where you're putting what you've learned into practice. There's no better way of developing the skill than doing that, really.
That's great. Cristina, I just want to come to you. I mean, you come across as very competent, very confident as well, and capable. Do you feel that you have got those natural characteristics of leadership? Does it come quite effortlessly?
I think I've always been very bossy, which is probably part of it. It's funny, everyone tells me I'm terribly confident. Inside, I'm like everyone else. I think women in general, and I, we're talking stereotypes here. I think our self-confidence is pretty. We're not great at self-confidence, I find. Men are pretty good at projecting it in a way that we had. I was going to pick up on something you said. You talked about, are you a natural person to stride across the office in your high heels, kind of shouting instructions at people? I think what's really interesting, and I've got this theory, leadership has really changed. Modern leadership has really changed, and it's changed because there's more about us women doing it. And I've been in this business now for 30 odd years, and when I first started, I had to be like a bloke. Leadership was about being like a man. It was, even wore shoulder pads, right? Even wore suits like the blokes. Yeah. And I acted like the blokes, and you were shouty, and you were you gave as good as you get, and you went to the pub with them, and you were and power and leadership, they're sort of two things, aren't they? But leadership was a very masculine thing. It was a very alpha male thing. And I think it's really fascinating that now a successful leader, whether they're male or female, it's about, and Helen talked about it, it's about emotional intelligence. And it wasn't 30 years ago. And I think that's down to those of us, and I wasn't the first by any means, but those of us who've kind of risen through the ranks have changed what leadership looks like. And that's really powerful, and that's really important. That every time you kind of worry about whether you're the right person for this job, should I take this step up? I'm not saying you should do it for the sisters, but I mean, you are able to shape what that role is and what the leadership skills needed for that role are. There is no set of stereotypes. And one of the fantastic thing about being in your 50s is, and having been around a bit, is that you actually get to the point where you go, I don't really care what they want for this role. This is what I've got. And if they want it, great. And if they don't. I know for some of you who are kind of much, you know, in the start of your careers, you can't really perhaps imagine that, but there is, you know, you do get to that point. And so, you know, there are some skills of leadership that are kind of, you know, you, as Helen said, you have to be able to communicate well with people. But again, it's learned and it's experience, and there is nothing that surpasses the old Superwoman pose in the mirror before you go onto the stage or whatever. And if you don't know it, I promise you, you stand in front of a mirror and go, I can do this. I am Superwoman. I can do this. Believe in myself. You know, fake it till you make it. I think it's the presentation side of it is something that you can learn.
So I mean, so Busola and I, I'm letting you all into a secret. Busola and I worked together about 1 million years ago, didn't we? When the leader at that particular point was the shoutiest, sweariest kind of the old school macho kind of leader that you can ever imagine in a newsroom, to the point where it was utterly terrifying. I mean, at that point, I don't know about you, Busola, but I never thought I could become a leader, because I never thought I could be like that. I mean, how about you? How did you feel?
Absolutely. I never thought I could be a leader. I'm naturally quite an introvert, really. And I always felt that my personality didn't lend itself to becoming a leader. And what I discovered over time is that, you know, sort of, you know, leadership has been shaped, and you can be a different kind of leader. And I realized that actually something I didn't realize at that point. I realized that actually I do have high emotional intelligence. I can read situations, I can communicate with people. And I found I became a leader quite quickly, actually. You know, sort of once I got going, once my career got going, I just had really fantastic opportunities come to me. And I was very nervous the first time I took a step up from being a features writer to a features editor, and I had sort of people that I had to lead and direct. I was extremely nervous, but what you do find is that once you can't, you're not taught to be a leader, but I think everyone can be a leader, because I think it's all about possessing certain things like empathy, possessing certain things like just having a positive mindset, being encouraging, talking to people, communicating. All those things count so much more, or just as much when it comes to being a leader. And sort of being, you know, and removing any sort of idea that, oh, to be a leader, you have to be strutting around in high heels and, you know, in this suit and being really sort of gruff and aggressive and defensive and all this sort of stuff, which is such, you know, such an 80s mindset, isn't it? And we know yeah. We've had leaders now that, you know, sort of they would just sit down and talk to you and be collaborative, and you get things done, and you get more out of people that way. And so really, yeah, I mean, I think anyone who sort of, you know, worked in journalism, particularly in papers around the 80s and 90s, you know, sort of, I mean, you just couldn't behave like that now, because, you know, that just doesn't get the best out of people. We've gone on to discover. We always knew that anyway, really.
Yeah, I know. And so Tal, I mean, I'm fascinated by this whole thing about the empathy and emotional intelligence. I mean, they're kind of words I think before would never really have been connected with leadership at all. They just weren't in that, that lexicon, were they? But I mean, and I imagine as a managing editor, you have to deal with some really difficult ends of the business, you know, hiring, firing, all of that sort of stuff. Do you find that that's the qualities that you require?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to speak a little bit to what the others have been saying, when I started in newspapers, everything was run by loud, shouty, sweary, terrifying men. And there were no women to be seen, or if there were, they would then disappear and have a baby and never be seen again. So I think I sort of, that's everything I saw, and it sort of made me resolve in whatever I did next, not to behave like that. And it sort of made me tougher. I sort of learned to kind of deflect any behavior like that and kind of, you know, internalize it in a positive way. And I think as a managing editor, you have to do a lot of listening, because obviously you're in a lot of delicate situations with personnel, with hiring, with sometimes you know, people leaving under difficult circumstances. So for me, empathy, listening and understanding people is super important, because I think once you have those relationships and people learn to trust you and work with you, then any situation that you're trying to resolve with that person becomes a bit easier. And I think as a leader, being someone who's approachable, people knowing, particularly in a role like mine, that they can come and talk to you about anything is really, really important. And knowing that there isn't going to be shouting and strutting and swearing.
But how do you, though, draw a line, or the line, between that and being soft? Particularly as, you know, quite often, you know, there's always going to be some people in any organisation who perhaps, you know, want to get away with doing the least they possibly can. Some people who aren't happy, some people who are disruptive. That you're always going to have those elements, because that's human nature. So how do you not become a pushover, which I think is the concern of a lot of people when they start out in leadership? What do you think, Tal?
I think well, for me, certainly it's about being quietly firm, if that's the term that makes sense. I sort of go into any situation knowing what I think the resolution should be under the circumstances that we're discussing in that particular scenario, and I kind of try quite hard to stay on track. So I will listen and understand what the person is saying, but I won't let it get to the point that I sort of let the conversation go in a direction where I don't want it to go. So I think it's about having really clear expectations of what you want out of the individual and the situation, listening to them and obviously adapting when needed, but really kind of getting it to the right conclusion in a firm way without having to be too sort of...
So do you always tend to go into a situation like that with your idea of the outcome fixed in your mind, or, you know, would you have that outcome sort of quite clear when you go into it?
Not always fixed. Usually there's, you know, there's more than one way that the situation could go, but I usually have an idea of what I think should happen. Yeah. Before.
And Cristina, I mean, obviously in these kind of, you know, difficult leadership positions you sometimes get, there's often, as we're sort of saying, sometimes there's just straightforward confrontation. And I think that is the thing, again, you know, I don't wish to make terrible sweeping generalizations, but sometimes women don't like confrontation. I don't like confrontation. How do you manage confrontation effectively?
I hate confrontation. I will run a mile from it. It's probably my weak point. I think that you have to. I've had a few tips on this actually for some coaching that I've had, which is really useful, which I will share. I think that when there's a situation where you think there's going to be confrontation, I think it's really worth planning it in advance. So kind of almost gaming it. Sometimes if it's going to be really hard, I get someone to pretend to be the other person and role play, which can be really useful. And I just think you have to keep saying to yourself, you know, this is two adults having a conversation. This is not me and a child. It's a psychological model. They talk about adult to adult rather opposed to adult to child. And you just have to, it depends what the situation is. It's like if you're firing somebody, which I've had to do, I'm sure all of us have, you have to kind of ride it. You have to kind of say to yourself, right, I'm going to tell this person something. First, we're going to start off by being really upset or shocked. Then they're going to be upset. Then they're going to be angry. And you just have to literally sit there and absorb it and don't argue back. But in situations where, you know, I think you go into a situation where it's going to involve confrontation, thinking, right, what do I need to achieve here? So I need to achieve this person performing better, in which case, how are we going to measure that? And so you can go in and you can sort of say to yourself, actually, I'm going to help this person, because if they don't perform better, then they're going to lose their jobs. So I think it's about planning it. It's really about planning it and thinking, what do I want to achieve? What are they likely to say? And what am I likely to say to that? And just not losing your temper, or being, you know, sticking to your lines about, you know, your not lines as in the script, but like, you know, this is what I want to say and this is how I'm going to say it. But planning is, I would say, is the top tip for confrontation, and reframe the language. Okay, it's going to be a tricky conversation. It doesn't have to be a confrontation.
Yes, that's interesting. Helen, how do you manage confrontation? How do you prevent, you know, you've got emotional intelligence, but how do you prevent becoming a pushover?
I think that any situation, including the most difficult ones that you go into, my starting point is always, how would I want to be led in this situation? If I was on the other side of the table, or if I was the member of a group that are being led through a particular situation or a particular transformation or change, how would I want to be led? And I think the answer is never confrontationally. I think that my conclusion is usually calmly, clearly, and as caringly as possible. And I would say that those three things I try to have those as my brand values, I guess, as a leader. And so whatever the situation is, it's about delivering it, however difficult it might be, with calmness, with clarity and precision, so that people are in no doubt as to what needs to happen, but also with that empathy and with that care. And I do think that should be applied to every leadership situation, is how would you want to be steered through this if it was you on the other side of it? And if you approach it like that, then you have a better chance of bringing people with you, because you're explaining to them how it should be done and why it should be done in a way that acknowledges that it might be difficult. And that's how I try to approach things. I think the most important part of good leadership in any situation is taking responsibility for how you come across in any given scenario, because there's nobody else responsible for that. You set the culture and make the changes. So you need to have your own leadership brand values clear at the outset, and then stay true to them, whatever the situation is that you're leading people through.
I think that's fascinating, the idea of having your own leadership brand values. I mean, that's a really interesting way of approaching it, isn't it? And then you've kind of got that there as your mantra to get you through. I mean, Busola as well, I mean, sometimes, as Helen was saying, sometimes some of this stuff is really difficult. It's just difficult. And I think sometimes as humans, we've all got a tendency to try to avoid the difficult as well. You know, just think, oh, I'll do that tomorrow. Yeah, no, I'll have that conversation tomorrow. What is the best way of dealing with those difficult ones?
Yeah, I'm the opposite, actually. I think when there's a difficult situation, I want to get it over and done with. I just, and I think that is the key. I think do not delay it, because it plays on your mind. It's always there anyway, and it just needs to be done. And I think the best thing is just to, sort of to deal with it. And I completely agree with Helen. I think it's really important, sort of the words and the language used in these tricky situations, these difficult situations are just really key. I think that, bad news is always bad news, but oh my goodness, it can be delivered in so many different ways to kind of, just with a bit of understanding. And I think as leaders, we have that kind of sort of duty of care in a way, you have to deliver bad news with a sense of responsibility and a duty of care. And I just think that you just have to do it. It's never great, but I think that as a leader, you have to be prepared for these difficult situations, and you can't get away with just pushing it to the back of the cupboard and almost hoping it will go away, or sort of putting it off. I'll do it tomorrow.
I'd like to talk now a little bit about how you go about changing cultures. Now, again, I think that can be, it doesn't matter what size team it can be. You could be leading a team of 3 people and you just want to change the culture so they file their copy earlier in the day, or it could be that you're leading 1,000 people and you want to change the entire culture around what the values of your organization are. So changing culture can happen at any kind of level, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, because people they kind of always want to kind of go back to their position of comfort there, where they feel secure, and because they've always done it in that way, and it feels very often like trying to sort of turn an oil tanker around. Tal, how do you go about trying to, I mean, you've said that you've already recently had quite a lot of changes already at the Eye since you've been there. How do you lead culture change?
I think for me, the most important thing is lots of really clear information. So I think you have to set out with your vision and your reasons for doing what you're doing, and you have to communicate that really, really clearly to everybody that's involved, because when people don't understand why they're being asked to do things, then you get immediate resistance and attitude, and people don't want to do it, and you don't bring them with you. So I think for me, that step one is communicate. And I think you start on a kind of macro level, and then for me, what's really important is to drill down then into sub-teams or individuals where needed, to explain to them how they play a role in the change and how they contribute to the kind of wider goal that you're going towards. So I think, beginning with the group as a whole, over communicate actually is better than under communicating, and then drilling down into sub teams, different departments, department heads. And I think it's really important to bring any kind of management or department heads along with you. So they need to be brought on the journey very early on as well, so they can then bring their teams on board with them. So it's definitely a process.
And what is the best means of communicating? I mean, when you're talking about a lot of people, I mean, email, face-to-face, Zoom calls? What works and what doesn't work?
I think when you're communicating big change, you need more than one method of communication. So I think a meeting, you know, it's kind of town hall forum where something is discussed and presented to everybody is a really good thing. But I think you have to then follow that up with written communication where you really clearly set out what was spoken about in the meeting and what you're setting out to do. Beyond that, I then think, you know, smaller departmental meetings are really important as well, so that people have the chance to air their thoughts and questions. And then I think we often do forms where people can submit questions about changes that we're introducing, and they can do so anonymously. So it gives people a chance to ask everything they want to know without feeling like there might, you know, be judgment or criticism of what their thoughts are. So I sort of think everything as much as possible, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. Cristina, do you want to, on that point about leading culture change?
Yeah, in fact, actually, when I went to Sky, I was asked to go and change the culture there. And I think, yeah, I totally agree with what Tal said. I mean, that's my mantra: communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't, and take people with you. You only achieve change if you explain it clearly to people, and so you communicate it, and also collaborate. I get people to come up with the tools of that change themselves. So I kind of, one of the things I did when I went to Sky was, I don't think we really knew why they were there. So I got some people to get together to have a couple of workshops and come up with a set of values and a mission statement. It was a bit new age then, but everyone does it these days, don't they? In fact, I've done it everywhere I've been. And it's just, if people feel that they are part of the team that's come up with that mission statement, those values, then they themselves will do it. It's like if you get kids to cook vegetables, they'll start eating them. It's a very basic. This is why women are such great leaders, because we know these things. But yeah, it's about taking people with you. And if they're communicated to, and then they are collaborated with, then they will come with you. And you cannot change a culture, and you cannot initiate change without taking people with you. It just doesn't work. You can have all the best strategies in the world, but if you don't actually take the team with you, you won't deliver. It's that simple.
That's interesting. Helen, on that point about culture change, just talk us through any examples that you've got in the kind of the real world of how you've had to try and change culture, and how successful or not that has been.
I think it's really interesting hearing from the others, because I completely agree. It's that communication. I don't think you can over communicate, and I've led a number of newsroom workflow changes over the years in different capacities. And nobody has ever in my career said to me, you've given me too much information about that. I think that you can't over communicate when you're trying to implement significant changes. And I think it's really important. You have to break down, as was said earlier, if the changes are huge, you have to break them down into manageable chunks. People can only take so much in. So the way that we've always approached it when we are changing workflows and changing the way that people operate on a day-to-day basis, if you're trying to change working practices that have been embedded over a long time, you have to recognize that you will always get an element of spring back where changes that you think you've implemented haven't quite bedded in, and you need to go back and do more work on it. And I think when that happens, it's really important to remember that people are just being human. They're not trying to personally antagonize you by not doing things the way that you want. They're just struggling to change, and they need help, and they need reminding, refreshing, positive reinforcement. I'm a big believer in positive reinforcement. I learned an awful lot about leadership from my mum, actually, who when she retired, she was a senior civil servant in the Northeast, and I learned two things from her, really. That first of all, that it's possible to be a senior manager, a successful senior manager, and a good mum. And I also learned she had a mantra, which is now any of my team watching this will recognize this, and I can't repeat it exactly in polite company because it's a typically Geordie mantra, but it's that you get more with sugar than you do with something else. Yeah. I say that a lot, and I really mean it as well. I genuinely believe that. I think that there are inevitably really difficult processes that we have to go through in terms of implementing change as leaders, and there are times when things go wrong, but a massive part of good leadership and implementing change successfully is catching people doing things right.
Very interesting. Busola, on that point about culture change that you've sort of seen and trying to get people to operate differently, I mean, how do you lead them there?
I think it's the key thing, as everyone has said, is that communication. I think you have to clearly define what you want, what needs to be done, what changes need to be implemented, and then you kind of need to just keep keep repeating it, basically. And I think that is it. And obviously being, sort of offer encouragement for when people are getting it right, and offer encouragement when they're getting it wrong. But you have to but you have to keep on in terms of saying exactly what you need to be done. And I think that as long as people are clear about what is acceptable and what thing, sort of how you want your culture to be, that change will happen. It may not happen as quickly as you want it, but it will happen.
It's interesting. So I'm going to get to a few questions that have come in. So we've got a few questions already, and obviously anybody else that wants to add questions, please do. There's a good one here saying, well, I'll ask a question, and whoever wants to jump in on this one can. What do you think about the saying, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses?
Yeah, totally agree.
That's true.
Totally agree. I've done it. I did it. I once left a place because I couldn't stand the boss.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. If you want to retain good staff, then you need to be a good boss. And it's not that hard being a good boss, actually. It's not that hard.
I know lots of situations where, and I've been in a situation myself when I've stayed in the job much longer than I should have done, just because I enjoyed being there. And I think many people can relate to sort of, oh, I really ought to leave, but I like the boss, I like the people, I enjoy it, sort of I'll carry on. But the moment you have a really crappy boss, you can't wait to leave. And I've been on the other side of that as well, and just like, I just need to get out of here. So I completely agree.
And I think when you realize that you spend more time with that person or those people than you do with your children or your partner or the rest of your family, if you don't like them and you're unhappy, that's really toxic, and that's not an environment that you can really stay in, even if the job itself is something that you want to do.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if the thing that stands in the way of me leading in the way that I would like to is time, and just feeling that there's never enough time to do things properly. Has anybody got any fantastic tips on great time management?
Delegate. Seriously, and go in. And look, we can't make time elastic, but we can be very very precious about how we guard it and use it. Somebody once said to me, write down the 4 objectives that you've got for the next week or the next month or the next year, and every meeting you're invited to, unless it ticks 2 of those objectives, don't go to it. As about you, I get sucked into so many meetings. I get very bored in them because I've got a very short attention span. And so I've actually recently, I'll be very honest, I've just had 3 months off. I had June, July and August off because I was basically completely burnt out. A mixture of family issues and work, and I just took some time out, and I have come back quite ruthless about my time because it's precious, right? And trying to do everything is not good for anybody. So delegate, give jobs to other people, and delegate as much as you can possibly do. And again, go to meetings that are important. And if you're taking meetings, that's another one. That's a really useful tip, because hopefully you're all going to be the leaders of the future. At the very start of a meeting, very briefly outline what it's about and what you're trying to achieve, and then say how long it's going to be. And if it's booked in for an hour, make the meeting 50 minutes so that everyone's got 10 minutes between the next 2 meetings. And I think those things will make life easier for you. Delegate.
Thank you. Any other top tips around time and trying to cram everything you need to do into your lives?
Well, I think it's quite a female trait, I hate to say it, to sort of want to say yes to everything. I think that we need to be better at just saying no. And I completely agree with Cristina. I mean, I'm quite ruthless with my time. I have, I live in a sort of fancy world of interiors and cushions and lamps. But I have PRs wanting to sort of see me, have meetings all the time. And I'm very, very strict about who I see, you know, how important it is, you know, if I need to do this. And sometimes I will say, well, no, I can't meet you because I simply don't have the time, but please send me the information. And now I've got to the point where I actually said to someone today, I'm not taking any more meetings until the new year. And, you know, you just have to draw that line so that you don't run mad, and you can make time for the things that matter. Because otherwise you're just you're saying yes to everyone because you don't want to offend, and all that sort of stuff that, you know, females, you know, sort of get sort of worked up about, and you end up just driving yourself mad and just sort of running yourself to the ground.
I also think learning to prioritize is a really key critical skill, because if you don't prioritize, you will end up doing the less important things first, running out of time, and then being hugely stressed about the things that you absolutely have to do but didn't get time to do. So I try really hard to do that so that I'm not lying in bed at 3 a.m. with my mind worrying with all the things that I hadn't done that day and need to do the next day. And it's really helped me finish the day knowing that I haven't done everything I need to do, but it's okay because I've done the really important things. So I really recommend that.
And also, we never finish. The to-do list is never finished, right? And actually, ever thinking that we finished is a fallacy. You know, you do the things that you need to do that day, and the rest you just kind of will do at some point, right? Or give to someone else.
100%.
Okay, I've got a question now from Mary. Mary says, I've been a journalist for over a decade now and I've worked for a number of organisations across broadcast, print and web. I've rarely seen women from ethnic minority backgrounds in senior management roles and or board members. There is also an issue in other sectors like banking, etc. What do you think needs to be done to change in order to get more women of colour in these roles? Are there any initiatives in your own organisations that are encouraging this? So I don't know, let's go to Busola. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, I mean, I think that this is an issue that is an issue in so many areas, so many fields. I think the key thing, we're not going to have sort of people of colour in senior management if we don't have them in the first place. If they're not there to promote, we can't have them in senior positions. So it all starts, you know, stuff, you know, at the sort of ground level. It's about giving them, you know, sort of giving people opportunities, giving equal opportunities to enter these jobs. And so I think there has to be a lot of work, for instance, with the gatekeepers of these jobs. So we're talking about, you know, sort of being aware of conscious biases when you're employing. Where are you putting the adverts? You know, sort of who, you know, are you making clear that you are an equal opportunity employer? So there's so many things, even you know, going to sort of university level and school level. There's so much work to be done, and that's when we will get the people on the sort of, you know, sort of senior management. But it's important. It's important that all companies are aware, and it's not just about people of colour. It's just really about having a diverse mix. When you have a diverse mix of people, you will get, you know, in terms of our industry, you will get richer content. You will get richer stories. That, you know, there is nothing to lose from having a diverse mix of people. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done still, definitely.
At Sky, we've got a very big diversity inclusion drive, which has been actually going for a very long time, but we've had a big push on it recently. And we've all been given targets and quotas. You can argue over them, but I tell you what, they make people think.
Yeah,
and so recently, you know, we are well aware. So we've got in our senior leadership team, we don't have anyone at head of level, which is just below mine, of colour. I mean, there's only 3 of us that are women out of 15 people anyway, so we're making some progress. And until I got there, I was the first woman. But anyway, so what we're doing, and we, you know, it just so for example, at Sky now, you're not allowed, at Sky News, you're not allowed to interview you know, on your interview shortlist there's got to be somebody from a diverse background. Now and that works really well, because they may not be the right person for the job, but there's so many people you interview and you go, oh, you're not ready for this level, but actually I could put you there, and that's really helped. It also makes you, you know, people get, you know, they get their applications in and they want to do a short list of, I don't know, 8 people to interview, and actually they haven't actually got somebody from an ethnic background, and so they are forced to go and look for them. which I think has really worked. The other thing is the pipeline. The pipeline is really, really important. And at Sky, one of the things I'm really proud of that we've done, we've now developed what's called a content academy. And I think, please tell me if I'm wrong, Busola, but I think that a lot of black kids in particular don't think that journalism is for them. And it's not a profession that they can enter, probably because they see so few of them in it. And so what we've done is we've put a training scheme. So we've got a school leaver scheme, we've got a work experience scheme, and we've got a graduate scheme. And it's across the whole of content. So people can come and do 2 years, and they'll do a bit in the TV production department, working on Sky Sports. They'll do a bit on kind of the technical side of it, cameras and etc. They'll do a bit in Sky News, and they'll do a bit in Sky Sports News. So you kind of bring them in on a much broader playing field and give them a chance to work across all different things. And then they go, oh yeah, I could be a journalist. I enjoyed my time there. And it's very similar to a scheme that I set up at ITN when I was there, where we just rotated everybody. You just got them in a wider field and rotated them, rather than just being, you can only do this job if you're a fantastic writer. Actually getting people in. And it's about, and diversity and inclusion is not just about, and I'm not denigrating this, it's not about just colour as well, it's about social mobility. I cannot get over the amount of privately educated people that I am surrounded by at senior levels in the business now. And I'm sure it's changed. 30 years ago, maybe at junior level, I didn't notice that everyone around me was very posh and had been to private school. But it's about it's geographical mobility, it's social mobility, it's about gender, it's about race. But we're having a big push on people from black communities, and it's hard. It's really hard. But you have to. I think setting quotas and targets really makes people work a bit harder on where they're looking for people.
And I agree.
Sorry, was that Tal? Yes, do you want to come in there? Yeah.
I was just going to say that I really agree with what Busola said about entry level, and we launched an apprenticeship scheme, which is basically for people who traditionally face barriers into journalism. And we asked for people who have finished school rather than university, so that people that didn't have the opportunity to go to university aren't precluded from applying. And I do really agree that it needs to start from that level up, so that we grow the talent in the newsroom as well. It's really important. And we had a huge amount of applications actually for only 2 places, so we're hoping to be able to grow it next year.
Okay, that's interesting. And Helen, is that on that point?
I think Busola is absolutely right about the hiring process. So we have a big drive on improving that at Reach at the moment, and all of our hiring managers have been on an inclusive hiring training course and are going through that training now. And it is very much about being aware of unconscious bias, even when shortlisting, just making sure that when you are shortlisting for positions, that you are not making mistakes that could be avoided, that would mean that we would have more diverse shortlists at that very early stage in the recruitment process. And it's absolutely vital that all our hiring managers coming through are aware of that. And I mean, I've been hiring journalists for 15 years now, and I learned a lot from that training myself. It's a fantastic piece of training, and I think it's really important. And our position on it as a company is that it's mandatory training for all our hiring managers, and that's absolutely right. And the only way to make progress is to make sure that everybody does have that training, and that message is very clear.
And then there's a couple of questions that are sort of connected. Charlene Rodriguez says, what support is there for women returning to the newsroom after having a baby? Newsrooms can sometimes be unsupportive. This has been particularly pronounced during COVID-19. I think this automatically prevents women, especially women of colour, from taking the next step. And then that kind of links in with a question from Elizabeth Mystery, who says, what about support for those with caring responsibilities? Lots more people now have to combine work with caring for adults or older people. So I guess that's the sort of caring responsibilities. And I guess as leaders, what do you feel you have got in place, and how happy are you that is sort of sufficient where you are? Tal, do you want to come on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I've had 3 children, and I felt earlier in my career that you've sort of got punished for having children and wanting to spend time with them, because flexible working wasn't really allowed, or you couldn't work from home, or you couldn't compress days, and it sort of felt like you couldn't win. Either you didn't see your kids at all and worked hugely long days, or you had to step down or go backwards in your career. So I feel really, really strongly on this subject. And I think now we're much better at granting people flexible working requests if they have caring responsibilities or children, or knowing that people can work from home or compress days, or, you know, I think it's really, really important to take those requests seriously, because I know from experience that you can deliver everything that's required of you and still be present for your children if you have an employer that allows you to do so. And I think, yeah, it's a hugely important thing that we need to work on, because it's not the case everywhere.
I think COVID's made such a difference. It's been a terrible, terrible thing that's happened. But one good thing's come out of it is that men have been working from home. And I don't know about anyone else, but I have found that in our newsroom that at first the men were very resistant, because they thought that working from home meant slacking. I remember, oh gosh, when my daughter's now 19, so I think when I returned to work after maternity, I asked if I could work 1 day a week from home, and she's 19 now, so it'd be 18 years ago, and it was a really kind of a rare thing, and I think all the men were a bit suspicious about it, but boy, have attitudes changed. I've got 2 men at my level now who hated the idea of working from home, who now actually really love it. And I think what the pandemic has shown people, that actually you can, you don't have to live this kind of traditional, 9 till 5, or in our profession, 9 till 11 thing, business. You can be adaptable and you can work in different ways. And again, I think it's, I don't think there needs to be, I mean, most decent news organizations these days have pretty good scheme, there are rights to flexible working, etc. And most decent newsrooms these days are pretty, maybe I've been very lucky. I've had 2 children, and it's never been an issue. And again, but I think women have to be quite brave as well sometimes, and just say, okay, I'm coming back to work. I'm really looking forward to coming back to work, but actually I want to change my hours, or I want to do it differently. And if you're good at your job, no boss is going to not have you. They'd rather have you in your way than not have you at all. So I think we have to be quite brave as well, and do things for, not say just, I'm not saying do things for ourselves, but actually just challenge what the traditional ways of doing it have been before. And as I said, the pandemic, I think, has really, I mean, as I said, it's been the silver lining. It's really changed people's attitudes to what working looks and feels like, I think.
I think as a sort of a final question I'm interested to hear your views on is that I think, how do you, when you are a leader and you've got lots of people dependent on you and dependent on the decisions you make and how you operate, how do you safeguard your own well-being and your own mental health in that situation, and amidst all that sort of that's going on? Busola, do you want to talk about that? Have you got any tactics for looking after yourself?
Well, I think it's about just knowing when to stop and take time out, and just be. I suppose it's that whole thing about self-care, if you're not meant to be working, try not to work, try and put the out of office on, and think, what is the worst thing that can happen? And really, I think, and I've got a lot better at doing that over the years. I mean, I used to be really terrible for just working at any point in the weekend, anytime I had a spare hour, let me just do a bit of work. And, I just think that it's really important to just stop and put that out of office on, allow, sort of tell yourself, assign a certain period of time, whether, I mean, depending on what your role is and depending on what your hours are, but, sort of, I'm not going to work, sort of for 48 hours. I'm not going to look at my emails. I'm going to turn my notifications off. And you just have to stick to it. It is about being strict. Because otherwise, particularly now with all sorts of things firing at you, social media, digital, WhatsApp, text, there's all sorts of stuff. You'll never stop otherwise. And I think that's the key thing. I think lots of us just do not know when to stop.
I think that's true. Helen, have you got any? How do you manage to look after yourself?
I don't think I'm as good at this as I could be, but I think I've learned a lot about myself during the pandemic and during working from home. And I think the one thing I would point to is walking. So I never used to walk anywhere unless I absolutely had to, because there was no car or other way of getting there before. And the school run would be the best example of that. I sort of drove him to school. My little boy's 11, and I drove him to school every day, and then mad dash into the office. And it's only a mile. And when we were working from home, I started walking. And even though we're back in the office now, I've retained that because it is so good for my mental health to have that. It's much nicer talking to him and walking him to school and having a chat than it is sitting in traffic and being in the car. And I now have it in my diary. I put the school run in my diary so that nothing else can, in the morning at between 8:45 and 8:55 or whatever it is. It doesn't take very long to walk there and back. And that's in the diary. And it's so important for physical and mental health, and something that I will retain for as long as he will allow me to walk him to school, which is probably not that much longer given that he's 11 now. But I just think that it's really important, especially when we were working from home during the pandemic, the absence of a commute. You don't have that opportunity to order your thoughts at the start or the end of the day. And I think that really affected me in the early stages of working of being at home. And so having a walk in the morning and then making myself go on one in the evening really helped me to sort of come down from the day or get ready and order my thoughts ahead of the first meeting of the day. And I think that actually the best way to ensure that continues to happen is diarying it. And we shouldn't be apologetic about diarying those important self-care opportunities, because otherwise they won't get done. If they get diaried, they get done.
Very interesting. It's great. Tal, how do you sort of make sure that you don't crumble under it all?
I try not to overcommit my evenings, actually, because as much as it's tempting to say yes and want to see friends and go out, and obviously sometimes that's really important as well, I find that if I'm sleep deprived and I'm going from thing to thing, that's when I sort of start really struggling. So for me, my evenings are really important, sort of coming home, seeing my kids, and then putting them to bed and having a couple of hours of just peace and quiet, and kind of decompressing from the day I've just had. And so that's sort of my time, where I try to stay off my emails for a couple of hours and just, watch something terrible on TV and mindlessly stare at something that's not work or my phone. And yeah, just try and make sure I get good enough sleep, because again, I think that's really crucial. When you're sleep deprived, I think everything starts to crumble. So that's a really big one for me.
And Cristina, any thoughts on that, how you look after yourself when you're leading people?
Yeah, and I speak as somebody who didn't look after myself very well at all, and ended up having to have 3 months off to recover from being totally burned out. So I learned a lot of lessons. I think it's about, and what I've done now, it's similar. I mean, again, walking, we discovered walking, didn't we? Because it's the only way you could ever get out of the house. I have to say I got sick at one point of my bloody local park, but it's part of my life now. I think that one thing that I've done is that I have built in what I call grounding time. It sounds a bit new age, but in my diary there is a meeting that's it's just called Do Not Disturb, and it's literally half an hour. And in that half hour, I can sit and just breathe, or I can just go and potter, or I think it's really important to have a part of the day where you just go and just stop and go, okay, what am I going to do? And I've got a book, I've got a little notebook, I haven't got it with me here, it's a very nice notebook, it's my nicest notebook, and I've got on there, the front page says, what am I doing today to really live my life? And then I've written family, work, social life, family, work, friends, health, and soul. And so every morning in my special 9:30 slot, I look at that and I go, right, what am I doing today that's going to be out that I'm really living my life? And I don't say I do it every single day that I do that, but I make sure that I'm living my life the best way that I want to, and I get kind of quite ruthless about that now.
That's fantastic. I think what a great way to end. So if we can all just make sure that we're all living our lives, as well as leading people, whatever size of the team, whether it's small or large, or maybe if you're just the only team you're leading is yourself. You just
Same thing, right?
Yeah, it is. You just got to make sure you're living your life. So Thank you again so much, Busola, Cristina, Helen and Tal. You've been absolutely fantastic, really interesting. Sorry if we didn't manage to answer all the questions in the chat, but if there's ever anything more, just get in touch with us via Women in Journalism. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for Facebook for helping us put this event on. Really, really interesting, and hope to see you all soon.